They said legends never die, but sometimes they're reborn in the most unexpected places. In a quiet town deep within the Philippines, where the nights were long and the stars hung low over tin rooftops, a young boy grew up with a dream that didn't belong to his world. His family didn't have much, just a small radio that crackled in the corner of their modest home. But that radio carried the voices of giants. It played the deep, soulful drawl of Elvis Presley and the electrifying rhythms of Michael Jackson. The boy would sit there, wide-eyed, his imagination soaring far beyond the walls that surrounded him. Each time Elvis's voice filled the air, he felt something shift inside him. There was a warmth, a pulse, a heartbeat that echoed with the pain, power, and poetry of rock and roll. And when Michael's Billie Jean played, that pulse turned into lightning. The moves, the energy, the perfection. He wanted to live it, to breathe it, to be it. That's when it began. Every night after everyone fell asleep, he would sneak out of bed and stand before the cracked mirror in his small room. His reflection was blurry under the flickering yellow bulb, but he didn't care. He wrapped a towel around his shoulders, turned up the volume just enough to feel the rhythm, and sang into a hairbrush. At first his voice trembled, but as the days passed, it grew stronger, richer, deeper, and more alive. He learned how Elvis would close his eyes mid-note, how he tilted his head just before hitting the perfect tone. Then he'd shift into Michael's world, learning the sharp, controlled movements. The snap, the glide, the moonwalk. He didn't just copy them, he merged them. His body moved like Michael, but his voice carried the soul of Elvis. The neighborhood didn't understand it. They called him, the boy who lives in the past. But he didn't mind. Every legend starts as a story no one believes in. He'd watch old performances on an aging television set with faded colors. Elvis in his white jumpsuit, dazzling the crowd with his charm, and Michael on a glowing stage surrounded by fog making the impossible look effortless. He studied every detail, the hand movements, the breath control, the emotion behind each word. It was his education, his secret training ground. Sometimes, he'd perform for his friends on the street. He'd pull out a small Bluetooth speaker, play an Elvis track, and sing with all his heart. People would stop and stare, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. There was something about the way he sang, as if he had known heartbreak, hope, and the hunger for greatness. The kids laughed, the elders nodded, and a few even wiped away tears. He didn't know it yet, but he was slowly becoming a bridge between two musical worlds. His parents didn't see the dream at first. They wanted him to study, to find something practical. But whenever they saw him sing, they couldn't ignore the spark in his eyes. His father would often stand by the door, pretending to fix something, just to listen. His mother would peek through the curtain, smiling softly. They didn't say much, but they knew, something inside their boy was extraordinary. As the years passed, the boy's obsession turned into discipline. He'd wake before dawn to practice vocals, studying how Elvis controlled his tone and how Michael manipulated silence between beats. He mixed both worlds, rock and pop, soul and motion, power and grace. By day he worked small jobs to support his family. By night, he transformed into something larger than life. In those quiet hours, under a dim lamp and cracked mirror, he became the son of two kings, Elvis Presley's voice in his throat and Michael Jackson's rhythm in his veins. One evening, during a local town festival, he gathered the courage to perform publicly for the first time. His heart pounded as he walked onto the small stage made of wooden planks. The crowd was noisy and restless, not expecting much, but when he stepped into the light, something inside him shifted. The music started, an Elvis classic. His voice flowed through the speakers, strong and soulful. People turned, surprised by the sound. Then midway through the song he switched into a Michael Jackson groove, gliding across the floor like it was second nature. The audience gasped. It wasn't imitation anymore, it was transformation. For a few minutes, it felt like time had bent, and the spirits of Elvis and Michael were sharing the same stage again. After the show, people approached him with tears in their eyes, some clapping his shoulders, others simply speechless. He didn't win a trophy that night, but he gained something far more powerful, belief. Word spread across town about the Filipino boy who sings like Elvis and moves like Michael. Videos of his performance started circulating online. A few of them reached thousands of views, catching the attention of people far beyond his hometown. But for him, it wasn't about fame, it was about connection. Every time he sang, he felt like he was speaking to Elvis himself, to Michael too, as if both were watching from above, smiling, proud that their music still lived in someone new. Their voices weren't gone, they had simply found a new instrument to play through. As he walked home that night, the sky was quiet, filled with stars that shimmered like stage lights. He closed his eyes and whispered a promise to the two icons who shaped his life. "I'll keep your fire alive. I'll make the world remember." The boy didn't know it yet, but destiny had already chosen his path. A stage far greater than he ever imagined was waiting for him, a stage where even Simon Cowell would sit in disbelief. The boy who once sang into a hairbrush was destined to stand where legends had once stood, and in that moment under the Philippine night sky, the legend's return had already begun. He grew up in a world that didn't believe in dreams, a world where people worked to survive, not to shine, yet deep inside him burned something different. A rhythm that refused to stay quiet. Every night after helping his parents close their small shop, he would slip away into his tiny room, close the door, and press play on his old DVD player. The cracked screen flickered, and there they were. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, and Michael Jackson, the king of pop. Two men from different eras, different worlds, yet bound by one thing: the power to move hearts through music. He would sit there, wide-eyed, studying every move, every note, every smile. To him they weren't just singers, they were teachers, angels of music whispering lessons from beyond time. At first, he tried to copy them. He would tilt his head like Elvis, lower his voice to that deep southern tone, and say softly, thank you very much. Then he'd switch to Michael. His stance would change, his eyes sharpened, his feet began to glide across the floor as if gravity had let go. Sometimes, the small room shook with his energy. The neighbors laughed, saying, "That boy thinks he's Elvis today and Michael tomorrow." But he didn't care, because when the music played, he felt powerful. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could bring both kings back through him. As he grew older, that dream grew louder. While his friends were chasing trends and posting selfies, he was watching old black and white interviews of Elvis, learning how he spoke to the audience. He watched Michael's live shows from the 80s, studying how a single hand gesture could make a stadium of thousands scream. He noticed how both legends commanded the stage, not by showing off but by feeling every beat. He realized their magic wasn't about fame, it was about heart, and that's what he wanted, not just to imitate them, but to understand them, to channel the same fire that made people cry, smile, and believe again. He began performing in small community events. At first, people came out of curiosity, whispering, "Who is this boy trying to act like Elvis and Michael?" But when he sang the first note, the laughter stopped. He didn't sound like an impersonator. He sounded like someone possessed by music itself. The tone was pure Elvis, soulful, nostalgic, strong. Then suddenly, as the beat changed, he moved, smooth, sharp, like a young Michael. His feet glided, his shoulders snapped in rhythm, and the crowd gasped. They had never seen anything like it. Some recorded on their phones, others just stood frozen, as if history itself had come back to life in a tiny Filipino town. But even then he wasn't satisfied. He wanted to take it further. Late at night he practiced every note until his throat hurt. He danced until his shoes tore apart. His family worried, telling him to focus on something real, something that could pay bills. But he couldn't stop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elvis smiling under the spotlight and Michael spinning across the stage. It was as if they were calling him, guiding him. The dream was no longer just admiration, it had become destiny. One evening while scrolling through his phone he saw a video clip. America's Got Talent auditions open now. His heart skipped a beat. Could he? Should he? The thought felt insane. Thousands audition, few get through, but something deep inside whispered, do it. He imagined himself standing before Simon Cowell, the toughest judge in the world. He imagined singing with Elvis's soul and moving with Michael's fire. And for the first time, he truly believed that maybe, just maybe, he was born for that moment. The next morning, he made his decision. He took the small amount of money he had saved, money meant for new shoes or helping his family, and bought a one-way ticket. His mother cried, saying, "You're chasing ghosts." He hugged her tightly and replied, "No, Mama, I'm chasing my purpose." With an old leather jacket, one glove, and a dream too big for his small hometown, he stepped into the unknown. At the airport his reflection caught his eye in the glass. He saw the tired face of a young man who had sacrificed everything, sleep, comfort, certainty, for a dream that belonged to another century. But in that reflection, he also saw strength. He smiled softly, whispered to himself, for Elvis, for Michael, for me. The flight felt like a movie. He watched the clouds drift below, thinking about how both of his heroes had dreamed too. One from the deep south, one from Gary, Indiana. Both just ordinary men who changed the world. And now, here he was, a Filipino kid from nowhere, trying to honor them in the biggest way possible. He promised himself that no matter what happened, he would give the performance of a lifetime. One that would make both legends proud. When he arrived in America, the lights were brighter, the air heavier with competition. He could see performers everywhere, dancers, magicians, singers, all waiting for their moment. But he wasn't nervous. He had carried this fire too long to let fear take over now. Every step he took felt guided, every heartbeat matched the rhythm of Can't Help Falling in Love and Thriller. He was no longer just a fan, he was a messenger, carrying two legacies in one body, two worlds in one soul. That night, in a small rented room, he placed a photograph of Elvis and Michael side by side on the table. He looked at them and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll make the world remember you both." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and imagined the crowd rising, Simon Cowell stunned, and the lights shining down as if the heavens themselves were watching. He didn't know if he'd win. He didn't care. What mattered was that he was ready. Ready to show the world that legends don't die. They live on through those who believe. And when he stepped onto that stage the next day, with the microphone in his hand and his heart pounding in rhythm, he wasn't just a performer anymore. He was the bridge between two kings. He was the voice that time had been waiting to hear again. He was the dream, finally ignited. The stage was drenched in a golden glow, each spotlight cutting through the darkness of the theater like a beam of destiny. The audience's murmur was a gentle sea of anticipation, 1,000 whispers colliding with one another, each voice full of curiosity, skepticism, and excitement. At the very center of it all, standing rigid yet somehow poised, was the young Filipino performer whose journey to this moment had been long and grueling. He gripped the microphone with both hands, feeling its cold metal bite against his palms, and took a steadying breath. Every fiber of his being seemed to vibrate with a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and the profound weight of the task ahead. Behind him, the massive curtain shimmered faintly, reflecting the stage lights and hinting at the countless eyes that would soon witness what he was about to unleash. In the judges' panel, Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, eyebrows arched and expression skeptical, as if the world itself might pause to see if this young man could even approach greatness. The other judges exchanged glances, their faces caught somewhere between curiosity and polite indifference, their bodies tense, waiting to see whether the next moment would be historic or forgettable. The performer's eyes scanned the crowd, not seeking approval, but searching for connection. He thought of the countless hours spent in dimly lit rooms, singing to old black and white videos of Elvis Presley, imitating the deep, soulful timbre of the king of rock and roll, learning every quiver, every subtle vibrato, until it felt as though the voice of a legend had been woven into his own. Then came the moonwalks, the spins, the precise pauses, and the subtle head tilts of Michael Jackson. He had studied every nuance, every flick of the wrist, every ripple of the chest, until he could mirror MJ's magic with a seamless fluidity. Every movement was ingrained in muscle memory, every note embedded in memory and heart. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, and the world faded. The stage, the lights, the audience, all melted away into a private arena where only music existed. He could hear Elvis singing, warm and haunting, echoing in the corners of his mind, and Michael Jackson's voice cut through with rhythmic precision, a heartbeat he could not ignore. He felt the weight of both kings pressing against his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle he was destined to carry. His legs trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the energy coursing through him, a nervous excitement that made every nerve ending tingle. When he opened his eyes, the audience seemed to lean in collectively, as if sensing the shift in energy. The whispers quieted, the air thickened, and even Simon's frown softened into a hint of curiosity. The theater itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for that single, transformative moment that could either redefine the night or pass by unnoticed. He took another breath, slow and deliberate, letting the sound fill his lungs, anchoring him to the moment. The microphone felt like an extension of himself, vibrating in resonance with his heartbeat. He tilted it slightly, aligning it perfectly, a subtle gesture that carried more intent than any words could convey. Time for those few seconds became elastic. The seconds stretched and pulled, heavy with expectation yet fleeting like the brush of a feather against skin. Memories of small-town talent shows, late-night practice sessions, moments of self-doubt, and tiny victories flashed across his mind. Each memory added weight and depth to the performance about to unfold. He was no longer just a boy from a distant town in the Philippines. He was the culmination of decades of music history, a vessel through which two of the world's greatest icons might live again, even if just for a fleeting instant. He moved his lips slightly, feeling the resonance in his chest. The first note he would sing would be deceptively simple, almost tender, designed to capture attention without revealing the storm to come. It was the kind of note that belonged to Elvis. Deep textured and laced with an authenticity that demanded respect. Then, subtly, the rhythm of Michael Jackson would enter, hidden in his stance, in the slight tilt of his shoulders, in the controlled sway of his hips. The audience did not yet know it, But in that quiet anticipation they were about to witness something that defied expectation. Simon Cowell shifted in his seat, one hand tapping the armrest, eyes narrowing slightly. He was a man accustomed to spotting talent, yet instinctively, he sensed that this was not merely talent. There was an electricity in the air, a pulse that made the hair on the back of his neck rise, an intuitive understanding that the next few minutes might be historic. The other judges straightened, sensing it too. The audience's murmur had dwindled into a hushed silence, as though they themselves had recognized the weight of what was about to unfold. The young performer adjusted his posture one last time, centering himself in the glowing pool of stage light. Sweat beaded slightly on his brow, not from nervousness but from the intensity of focus. Every inch of him vibrated with energy, poised at the exact intersection of courage and anticipation. He could feel the presence of Elvis, the energy of Michael, the countless voices of past performers and mentors, all merging within him, driving him forward. The air around him seemed almost electric, the kind of charged atmosphere that only exists in moments when destiny collides with preparation. Then, as if the universe itself had synchronized its heartbeat with his, he leaned forward, and the microphone became more than a tool, it was a conduit. The world seemed to shrink to that single, fragile point in time. Every eye in the theater was on him, yet he saw nothing but the music, nothing but the invisible threads that tied him to the legends who had inspired him. The weight of expectation, the skepticism, and the history of music itself pressed upon him, and yet, he did not flinch. He had trained for this moment, dreamed of it, lived for it. As he inhaled deeply, the first faint hum of a note escaped his lips, almost like a whisper, almost like a secret. The audience leaned forward collectively, sensing the tremor of something extraordinary. It was the sound of Elvis Presley's soul wrapped in the young man's unique voice, softened yet powerful, familiar yet entirely new. A subtle shift in rhythm followed, almost imperceptible, a nod to Michael Jackson's timing, his control, the hypnotic sway that had made millions around the world pause in awe. Every tiny movement, every nuanced sound was perfectly calculated, yet infused with genuine passion, creating a tension that made the audience hold their breath. It was in that precise moment, the pause between the whispered note and the first full chord, that magic began to bloom. Simon's face froze, disbelief etching every line. The audience seemed suspended in time, their eyes wide, hearts racing, senses heightened. This was more than a performance. It was a rebirth of musical history, a collision of two worlds, and a young Filipino performer standing bravely in the center of it all, ready to rewrite the rules of what was possible. Every detail, from the tilt of his head to the gentle sway of his hips, hinted at the storm that was about to erupt. The blend of power and finesse, the merging of two legendary souls into one living moment of musical brilliance. Even before the first full note rang out, it was clear no one would ever forget this moment. Not Simon, not the audience, not the judges. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation, every person present feeling the promise of something extraordinary. The young performer's heartbeat synced with the pulse of the theater, his breath with the rhythm of destiny. He had become the vessel for two legends, the bridge between the past and the present, the living proof that music can transcend time, borders and doubt. And then, finally, the first true note rang out, resonant, rich and perfectly balanced between the power of Elvis Presley and the smoothness of Michael Jackson. The silence shattered like glass, replaced by a collective gasp, a wave of awe that swept across the audience. The moment he had waited for, dreamed of, and trained his entire life for had arrived. The moment before the music had ended, and now, the music itself had begun, a symphony of two worlds converging through one extraordinary voice. The moment the music began, the air in the auditorium seemed to change. A hush fell over the audience as if the entire room collectively held its breath. The bright lights that usually sparked chatter and restless shuffling now seemed to focus solely on him, the young Filipino performer standing nervously in the center of the AGT stage. His hands tightened around the microphone, knuckles pale, but his eyes held a spark that no fear could dim. From the first note, it was clear this was no ordinary audition. It wasn't just singing, it was storytelling, it was magic, it was history resurrected. The deep, velvety tone of his voice rolled out like a wave, commanding attention and stirring emotions that the audience didn't even realize were waiting to be stirred. The unmistakable essence of Elvis Presley flowed through every syllable, rich, warm, and impossibly soulful. But as he continued, there was another layer, subtle yet undeniable. It was the energy, the rhythm, the effortless groove that belonged to Michael Jackson. The smooth, precise shifts in tone, the gentle yet powerful vibrato, the way he accentuated the lyrics, all of it carried the unmistakable signature of the king of pop. He was not copying, he was channeling, blending two legends into something new, something alive, something breathtaking. Simon Cowell. who had leaned back skeptically in his chair at the start, now sat forward, eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief. Every instinct that had told him this would be just another audition was crumbling with each note. The Filipino performer's hands moved naturally to his hips, then outstretched in classic MJ style, while his voice carried the charisma of Elvis, deep and commanding. The combination was disarming, mesmerizing, as if the two greatest performers of history had fused into a single entity. The audience could barely sit still. Some were frozen, staring in shock. Others had their hands to their mouths, trying to comprehend what they were witnessing. It was surreal, utterly impossible in any logical sense, but undeniably real. He moved across the stage with a confidence that seemed effortless. Every footstep, every slide, every subtle turn was a homage to Michael Jackson's iconic choreography. Yet there was no mimicry. Instead, there was a personal touch, a Filipino heart and soul infused into each movement. The audience felt it, sensing the raw honesty behind the performance. When he spun and hit the dramatic high note, the sound didn't just reach the ears, it reverberated in the chest, in the heart. It was electric, palpable, a living testament to the power of music when executed with complete mastery and absolute emotion. The judges were now on their feet. Heidi Klum's eyes glistened with tears, Amanda Holden clapped until her palms were sore, and Howie Mandel wore a stunned, open-mouthed smile that said everything without words. But Simon Cowell was speechless. There are moments in a career spanning decades where the unexpected happens, moments that defy logic and categorization. This was one of them. He couldn't summon his usual witty critique or pithy comment. He could only watch frozen as the Filipino performer transported the audience through decades of musical history in mere minutes. It was both humbling and electrifying to witness a young talent embodying the essence of two music icons simultaneously. As the performance progressed, the Filipino performer's voice soared and dipped with perfect control. Every pause, every accent, every note was timed with precision yet felt effortless. It was as though he was improvising with the spirit of the music itself, guided by intuition, skill, and reverence for the legends he represented. When he hit the high, sustained note, it was not merely technical perfection. It was emotional resonance. People in the crowd gasped. Others wept. Phones were raised, not to capture the moment for social media, but because no one wanted to forget even a single second of this experience. Then came the bridge, a moment where many performers would falter under pressure. Not him. He transitioned seamlessly, blending a subtle falsetto reminiscent of Michael Jackson with the full-bodied resonance of Elvis' signature power. Each gesture, each movement, perfectly synchronized with the highs and lows of his voice, told a story of dedication, of endless hours of practice, of a young man's love for music and reverence for the giants who inspired him. It was a performance that required not just talent, but courage. The courage to take the risk of combining two iconic styles in a way that could have easily gone wrong. And yet, here he was, flawless, commanding and electrifying. The climax approached, and the Filipino performer delivered it with a combination of theatricality and sincerity that left the audience in awe. He spun, slid, and struck poses that were reminiscent of Michael Jackson's legendary stage moments, but with the heart, the soul and the warmth of Elvis Presley's stage presence. Every note, every move was a dialogue with the audience, a conversation in sound and motion that transcended words. It was a performance that asked them to feel, to remember, to experience music in its purest form, alive, emotional, and utterly human. And then, in the final seconds, he paused. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving him in a soft spotlight. He held the last note, perfectly balanced between power and tenderness. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. A collective inhalation from an audience who didn't want the spell to be broken. It was a moment of reverence, as if everyone present understood that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The kind of performance that doesn't just entertain. It changes something in the soul forever. When the final note faded, the auditorium erupted. Applause, cheers, and whistles filled every corner. Judges, audience members, and crew alike were on their feet, some still trying to catch their breath. Simon Cowell, finally finding his voice, stood in stunned admiration, clapping slowly, a rare smile breaking across his face. It was more than approval, it was respect, awe, and recognition that history had just been made. For those few minutes the worlds of Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson collided, reborn through the voice and heart of a Filipino performer who dared to dream beyond boundaries. In that moment, it was clear that music had triumphed. Technique, emotion, and history converged, creating a performance that would be remembered long after the applause faded. It wasn't imitation, nor was it a simple tribute. It was transformation. The audience left the theater changed, inspired, and overwhelmed. They had witnessed a young man who embodied the spirit of two of the greatest performers of all time, who honored their legacy while creating something entirely his own. It was a reminder that legends never truly die. They live on in the hearts of those willing to carry their fire, to sing their songs, and to dance their moves. And that night on that stage, in that single unforgettable performance, the spirit of Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson had returned. Not in memory but in a living, breathing, astonishing reality. The music stopped. For a brief moment time seemed to freeze. The bright stage lights no longer flashed, the microphones were still, and the echoes of the last note hung in the air like a fragile thread. The audience, the judges, even the crew behind the cameras, all were frozen in disbelief. No one had expected what they had just witnessed. It wasn't simply a performance anymore, it was an experience, a feeling so intense that it reverberated through the hearts of everyone in the room. The Filipino performer stood center stage, chest heaving slightly, sweat glistening on his forehead, a faint tremor in his hands. The silence around him was not empty, it was alive, almost reverent, as if the entire theater collectively held its breath to savor the moment that had just unfolded. The energy from his performance still lingered, thick and palpable, like a living presence that refused to dissipate. This was no ordinary talent show act. Every note he had sung, every movement he had made, had carried the essence of two of the greatest icons in music history. The smooth, commanding resonance of Elvis Presley's voice had filled the room, powerful yet tender, striking every chord of nostalgia, admiration, and awe. It was the voice of someone who understood the depth of emotion, the pain, and the joy that Elvis had poured into his music. And then, seamlessly, the energy of Michael Jackson had taken over. The stage came alive with fluid motion, perfectly timed footwork, and that unmistakable rhythm that MJ had made legendary. The transitions were flawless, the synthesis of two iconic styles so natural that it felt less like imitation and more like reincarnation. It was as though the spirit of both legends had been channeled through a single human vessel, a bridge across decades of music and culture. Simon Cowell, a man known for his skepticism and often blunt critiques, was frozen in a state of awe. His usual composed demeanor had melted away, replaced by a wide-eyed astonishment that was impossible to hide. He leaned forward in his chair, his arms resting on the judge's desk as if trying to anchor himself in reality. The unmistakable combination of Elvis' emotional depth and Michael's dynamic energy was more than he had anticipated, more than he thought could exist in one performer. The Filipino artist's voice, clear and confident, had touched something deep within him. A memory of the past, the thrill of witnessing raw talent, the kind of moment that only happens once in a generation. And yet it wasn't just Simon. The entire judging panel had risen to their feet, mouths slightly open, eyes glistening with awe and disbelief. The crowd had initially leaned forward in curiosity, unsure of what to expect, but now they erupted, not with ordinary applause, but with a standing ovation so thunderous it shook the theater. The audience's reaction was unlike anything that had been seen before. Phones were raised high to capture the moment, but even digital screens could not fully convey the magic in the room. People were crying, laughing, cheering, some whispering to themselves in disbelief, others shouting their amazement across the aisles. The applause felt endless, a tidal wave of sound that seemed to stretch time itself, as if everyone collectively understood that they were witnessing history. Each note, each movement, each subtle gesture of the performer had resonated not only in the ears but in the soul. This was a fusion of eras, a collision of legends, yet it felt entirely new, original, and uniquely alive. Back on stage, the young Filipino performer allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. He had imagined this moment countless times, practicing alone in front of mirrors, dreaming of the day he could honor his idols and inspire others. But no amount of rehearsal could have prepared him for the overwhelming emotion that now enveloped the theater. It wasn't about winning a competition, it was about connection, about bridging generations and cultures through the universal language of music. His heart raced, a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. For a fleeting second he closed his eyes, letting the applause wash over him, letting the presence of the two legends he had admired for so long fill him with their energy. He felt connected, not just to Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson, but to every single person who had believed in music's power to move hearts. The stage lights began to soften, bathing him in a warm golden glow that seemed almost sacred. Behind him, the cameras captured every detail: the glint of sweat on his brow, the subtle smile that spread across his lips, the faint shiver of his hands as he finally allowed himself to breathe freely. The audience continued to cheer, some rising to their feet repeatedly, unable to contain their excitement. Social media cameras in the crowd flickered like fireflies, capturing glimpses of what would soon become viral clips shared across the world. This moment would not be forgotten. It was more than a performance, it was a testament to the enduring power of music, a reminder that true talent transcends boundaries, cultures, and time itself. As the standing ovation continued, a quiet realization began to settle over the performer. He understood that he had done more than impress, he had inspired. He had shown that the spirit of legends never truly dies, that it can live on in the hearts and voices of those who dare to dream. For a moment, it felt as though Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson themselves were watching, nodding in approval, smiling at the young artist who had dared to carry their legacy. Every leap, every note, every tiny gesture had been a tribute, but also an evolution, a statement that the music of the past could find new life in the present. Finally, the applause began to ebb, though the energy in the room remained electric. Simon Cowell rose from his seat, clapping with an intensity that mirrored the crowd's awe. His expression, a mix of admiration, astonishment, and perhaps even disbelief, reflected the enormity of what had just occurred. The performer took a step forward, bowing slightly, allowing the audience to honor him as much as he honored the icons who had inspired him. There were no words that could fully capture the magnitude of the moment. There was only sound, emotion, and connection, an unspoken agreement that something extraordinary had just taken place. In that theater, the impossible had been achieved. Two musical giants, separated by time and space, had seemingly returned for one perfect, unforgettable performance, and through a young Filipino performer who had dared to dream big, their legacy had found new life. The applause continued to ripple, echoing in every heart, a reminder that music has the power to transcend everything: fear, doubt, distance, even death. And for the audience, the judges, and the performer himself, the memory of this night would never fade. It was a night when legends lived again, not as echoes of the past, but as a vibrant, breathing reality, felt in every note, every step, and every soul present in the room.